제 젬벌 soldangi mi jang zoner monum 젬벌 ngambian akara da 정도 실물도 돈다 되게 전화 기셔서 우리 저로 제는 정금 자월 되게 주는 일로 몸 지메 번져 전화 서로 고게 또반 바로 신기로.
The supreme, profound, and subtle Dharma is rarely encountered in eons. Now we hear and follow it. May we realize the Tathagata's meaning. To liberate all sentient beings, please give rise to the supreme bodhicitta. Next, we will continue our study of Entering the Middle Way by Chandra Kirti. For this teaching on Entering the Middle Way, we'll be sharing audio and video recordings. Since things are a bit unusual right now, I plan to release about one class per week. That way it won't feel overwhelming and everyone will be able to follow along. I think listening to one class a week, if even that feels hard, then it may be difficult to keep up. After all, it's only about an hour. In fact, if everyone puts in a little effort, it should be manageable. So I hope that as these teachings are released, you will all take them seriously. At first, many people might listen to a class or two out of simple curiosity, wondering what the middle way is all about. In truth, to study any profound Dharma, we need consistent and joyful effort. Without this consistency, just listening to a couple of classes won't mean much, and it won't solve your deeper problems. Therefore, as you follow along, you must make time for it. Because for many of us, even when we aren't listening to the Dharma, we still end up wasting a lot of time. Since life is limited, while you have this opportunity, you should really cherish it. Moreover, if the audio and video files are available for download, you should download them right away. That way you will still have access to these resources in the future. Otherwise, some things are just out of our control right now. Many people in the past wanted to receive these teachings, and I feel a bit of regret about it now. In the past, some Khenpos, Khenmos, and senior resident monastics all really wanted to hear this, but they eventually passed away. While giving the teachings this time, I also thought of many old Dharma friends. They had requested this of me many times, and I had agreed, but their lives simply couldn't wait. In truth, it is the same for many of us. If we don't act right away to accomplish these meaningful things right now, the future is highly uncertain, so everyone should really try hard to treat this as something truly important. So let's continue with Entering the Middle Way. We are currently on the third chapter, the third Bhumi. It primarily focuses on the paramita of patience. The definition of the Bhumi concerning the paramita of patience was already covered earlier. Now, as we formally begin the paramita of patience, it will mainly be about the principles of cultivating patience. Regarding the principles of cultivating patience, we previously touched upon it, but today our discussion on this can be divided into two main aspects: cultivating patience from the perspective of the ultimate truth, and cultivating patience from the perspective of the conventional truth. There are two aspects to this. Let's begin with the first. For bodhisattvas who have realized selflessness, what is there to cut, who is there to cut it, and when? They see all phenomena as reflections in a mirror, and through this they perfectly practice patience. This primarily explains how to observe and practice patience from the perspective of the ultimate truth. As we all know, within the ultimate truth, the three spheres do not truly exist. This means that the person practicing patience, the enemy inflicting harm, and the practice itself, when we look at these three aspects, none of them can truly be found. So for a bodhisattva who has already realized selflessness and emptiness, who sees that all phenomena are ultimately unarising and unceasing, what is their state of mind? In their experience, there is no enemy inflicting harm and no self being harmed. Questions like when the harm occurs or where it takes place, all these subject-object relationships of harm simply do not exist for them, because they have fully realized the truth of selflessness, the absence of a self, a person, or a sentient being. Once this profound truth is understood, all worldly dualities completely fall apart. There is no object to be angry at, and no self to feel the anger. Under these circumstances, as we discussed yesterday, even if our flesh and bones were to be sliced off piece by piece, none of it is perceived as real to them. They see all phenomena as reflections. For such a bodhisattva, having seen the ultimate truth where nothing can truly be found, during their post-meditation state, all phenomena, including their own body, are seen merely as dreams and illusions. Every single phenomenon, including themselves, everything encompassed within samsara and nirvana, is perceived as dreamlike and lacking inherent existence. They are free from the concepts of I and mine, just like the moon's reflection in a pool of water. If we throw a stone at the moon's reflection, we cannot possibly destroy it. This is what is meant by, and through this they perfectly practice patience. Dwelling in such a state, one can naturally perfect the practice of patience. The phrase "and through this" implies what we discussed yesterday. It is not just through overwhelming compassion for sentient beings that a bodhisattva cultivates patience. They don't rely solely on compassion to practice patience. More importantly, by reflecting on the ultimate truth and recognizing all phenomena as empty, relying on this profound understanding allows one to truly perfect the practice of patience. As it says in the aspiration of Maitreya, if the four elements themselves lack inherent existence, then whether it is anger or patience, none of these truly exist either. This is the true paramita of patience. This is what is meant by the prayer to manifest the paramita of patience. So, on our spiritual journey, what matters most is that a bodhisattva who truly understands selflessness is completely capable of enduring anything. Moreover, when practicing patience, it requires no forceful effort. Unlike us ordinary beings who just grit our teeth and bear it, there's no need for that, because in their experience, none of this is real. To use a worldly example, the ancients used to tell a story. Imagine someone sitting in a boat and another boat is approaching from a distance. It looks like it's intentionally going to ram into them. Naturally, the person gets extremely angry. But upon closer look, they realize the boat is empty. There's no one inside. It was just blown over by the wind. In that instant, their anger naturally vanishes. The same principle applies here. If we view the person harming us as inherently real, as truly existing, we will naturally resent their actions and get angry at them. But if you realize that the other person is empty, that you yourself are empty, and that the entire situation, including the time and place, cannot truly be found, then anger simply cannot arise. It just doesn't exist. Therefore, if we truly understand that all phenomena are empty, we will certainly be able to practice patience. However, in today's world, not only are we deeply attached to things we consider real, we even get attached to things that are completely illusory. And the images appearing on the screens, we clearly know they aren't real. Yet, captivated by these illusions, our minds become completely glued to them. This too is a form of confusion and delusion. As we often hear people say nowadays, especially regarding young people, they get deeply involved in playing video games. They get addicted to these games, and once they're hooked, they can't put them down. Eventually, it even starts to affect their mental health. They might even spend huge amounts of money, including buying in-game gear. I don't know much about this, but many people, even some monastics nowadays, spend a lot of money on these things. Someone might spend 40,000 on gear or 20,000 and just keep playing until eventually, for spiritual practitioners, falling into this kind of addiction is truly terrifying. So in our human world, it's as if the whole world has been drugged by an illusion. Everyone is completely intoxicated and captivated by it. But in this vast world, in this massive universe, so many people are dreaming and almost no one realizes it. They still believe it's all real. They are dreaming within a dream, yet they still take it as reality. So sometimes when looking at our world, you can't help but feel a bit of pity for sentient beings. The actual truth of all phenomena, including you and me, is that none of it can be found. The enemy cannot be found, and the self cannot be found. But regarding this, they have absolutely no certainty or understanding. Even when we ourselves clearly know this, we look at the internet and our phones and all the information there, and we drown ourselves every day in these illusory appearances. On one hand, we know it's fake and doesn't truly exist, but once you become addicted, as many people say nowadays, it actually alters the cerebral cortex and causes physiological changes. This so-called addiction is exactly like drug addiction. With drugs, you have no control. It becomes a mental and physical dependency. Nowadays, surfing the internet and watching short videos have completely become, how should I put it, a physiological change, an actual physical alteration in the brain. This change makes it so that if you tell them to put it down, to stop looking at their phone, they simply can't do it. Tell them to get off the computer, and they still can't. It completely binds a person's mind and body together, locking them into a terrifying illusion that has captivated almost every being in this world. In the past, we thought drug addiction was terrifying, and it's true that drugs are hard to quit. But this phenomenon of digital delusion we see today is just as impossible to quit and just as terrifying. Next, we will discuss cultivating patience from the perspective of conventional truth. This is divided into three main parts: cultivating patience by reflecting on the faults of anger, cultivating patience by reflecting on the merits of patience, and a general conclusion. Let's start with cultivating patience by reflecting on the faults of anger. This has four sections. The first is contemplating that anger is pointless, and therefore we should practice patience instead of getting angry. This is the main idea. So, looking at the first of these four sections, the text says, if harm is already done, why be angry? Anger cannot undo what has already happened. Therefore, anger is completely useless, and it contradicts the goals of future lives. This primarily explains that giving rise to anger is pointless, so you should practice patience. It focuses mainly on the faults of anger. Why is it pointless? If harm is already done, for example, if someone has already harmed me, whether by hitting me, insulting me, or harming me in some other way, if instead of practicing patience I react with anger towards them, that anger is actually of no use at all. Anger cannot undo what has already happened. If I get angry at them, but the harm they caused is already complete, already finished, getting angry now won't help. We can't turn back time. For instance, if someone has already spoken ill of you or has already stolen your property, the harm is done, the injury has happened. If you seek revenge and try an eye for an eye, you will only end up losing more yourself. So this is not the right approach. Therefore, anger is completely useless. When someone harms you, it actually has karmic significance. It is a karmic repayment, which is quite meaningful. So if you try to retaliate and give rise to anger, it truly has no meaning. It has no benefit for this life. And if you hold on to that anger and harm them, insult them, or speak against them, you are going against the law of karma. Not only will you fail to undo the harm you suffered, but you will also ruin everything for your future lives. Even if you had a bright future ahead of you in the next life, continuing to hold on to this hatred might create the negative karma to pull you into the hell realms, which is truly terrifying. Therefore, we must use wisdom to examine this. As it says in the way of the Bodhisattva, if a situation can be fixed, why be unhappy? And if it cannot be fixed, what use is being upset? This means that if something has already happened but can still be changed, there is no need to be upset about it. If a situation is truly beyond repair and completely shattered, then reacting with a desire to harm is unnecessary and will only hurt yourself. Therefore, we should use rational wisdom to examine this. In reality, if you truly give in to anger, it is a very destructive behavior, because when you direct anger at someone else, you are actually completely exposing yourself in front of them. Your true character and behavior are put on full display. From then on, in people's minds, they will remember how terrifying you are when you lose your temper and how awful you can be when angry. It's like the saying, once bitten, twice shy. If you fly into a massive rage just once and hurt someone, even if you treat them incredibly well afterward, the impact of that one outburst will never be erased from their minds. So even just in terms of this life, giving rise to anger is very damaging. People nowadays care a lot about interpersonal relationships. When it comes to relationships, someone with a severe temper will have a disastrous social life. Even if people don't say it to your face, behind your back and in their hearts, they will think, wow, I need to be careful around this person. If they blow up, it's terrifying. In everyone's eyes, when you gave in to that anger, you looked like an absolute madman with zero self-control. Naturally, people will be afraid of you. In their conversations, whenever your name comes up, people will talk about it. We see this in daily life all the time. For example, if a department needs to hire someone during the recruitment and interview process, they might say, wow, this person presents well and has great qualifications, but their only flaw is a terrible temper. If something happens, they won't be able to control themselves. Never mind, let's drop this person. This also applies to many lay people when starting a family. Just as I mentioned in the last class, take Hemingway, for example. Wait, maybe it was someone else, the name escapes me right now. But he had a notoriously bad temper. So whenever he got married, every single one of his wives ended up resenting him. Even though he was brilliant and had his merits, that's just how it was. So the main point here is that if you have a heavy temper, your interpersonal relationship are likely to be quite poor. That is one aspect. Another aspect is that people today place a high value on health. Your anger takes a massive toll on your overall mental well-being, and it causes serious harm to your physical health as well. Through many examples like these, we can see the truth of this. Of course, when it comes to anger, everyone has a different personality. Some people are born with a very strong temper, while for others it might be related to their upbringing and education. Some of us are told that we need to be tough and fierce, otherwise people will take advantage of your kindness. Therefore, they think we must act fiercely in front of others so that we don't get bullied. In reality, if you possess a truly kind heart, as some scholars in the past have said, kindness is an investment that never fails. It is the best approach. As long as you are kind, even if others might initially perceive you as weak or powerless, it is actually the most reliable and secure path, bringing all kinds of incredible benefits. So our main focus here has been the faults of anger. Next, we move to the second point, cultivating patience by reflecting that what brings benefit should not be turned into harm. It was originally something beneficial, so we shouldn't turn it into a source of harm. This is how we practice patience.
Ngun shi pa yi ma ge li jim zhewe kang, zabar shi pa jo par ndo pa tenyit ko, jan lang no pa tang na chuwe dhungr shir, sawa nyat chirtawa nan chapar shir.
If the suffering caused by past evil deeds can be completely exhausted, why react with anger and harm others, only to sow seeds of future suffering? This primarily means that when we experience harm from others, it is actually beneficial to us. If you react with anger towards them, you turn it into something harmful. So the text here says we should understand that because in the past we must have caused some kind of harm to others. Because of that initial harm, whether it is a result corresponding to similar causes or a fully ripened karmic result, it comes back as harm to me in this life. It's impossible that for absolutely no reason I am suddenly being attacked today. Any benefit or harm I experience today is caused by previous karmic connections. If I am bullied or harmed by someone today, it is simply the result of my own past negative karma. If I can accept it directly, then this suffering will come to an end. I harmed them in the past, so I must experience the result in this life or in a future life. But if I bear it patiently now, then my suffering becomes what we often call heavy karma ripening as a light retribution. In this way, I won't have to experience it again. If the suffering can be completely exhausted, if I am harmed by someone in this life and we can accept this suffering, then the suffering ends forever. It will not ripen again. But if instead of practicing patience, I retaliate and harm them, that is completely irrational. Why react with anger and harm others? Why should I? This person is actually doing me a favor. It is as if I am paying off a debt I owed them. So when someone comes to collect a debt, logically I should just pay it off. That is the reasonable thing to do. But if I refuse to pay the debt and even hit them with a stick instead, that makes no sense. The cost to me becomes even higher. I already owed them from the past. If on top of that, I harm them now, once the law of karma takes effect, the consequences for me will be much more severe. So why would we use anger to harm them? If we do harm them, it will bring about terrible consequences in the future. You could say that if I truly retaliate with anger or react out of hatred, I am inviting future suffering. It is essentially sowing the seeds of suffering. The original karma of harming others hasn't even been fully purified yet. And on top of that, I start creating a terrifying new negative karma that will drag me into the lower realms in the future. Therefore, if we make such an irrational choice, we are truly being foolish. Fools do not desire suffering, yet they actively create its causes. As it is said in the way of the Bodhisattva, fools do not want to suffer, yet they insist on creating the causes of suffering. Sentient beings are exactly like this. Whatever karma I created in the past, I will experience the corresponding result. Whatever actions I took in the past determine the results I experience today. For example, if today people hit me, scold me, harm me, rob me, attack me, or slander me, when we look at this through a result of similar causes or the retribution of fully ripened results, when karmic results unfold, the truth is that in the past I must have committed this exact negative karma against this very person or someone else. Because of that specific cause, I am facing this retribution in my current life. So many people today probably do not realize this. When someone harms them, they feel it is completely unprovoked. In reality, it is simply a reflection of our own mind. If you truly harbor an attitude of resistance or revenge toward them, this cycle of retaliation will become endless. But if in the face of any harm from others, you observe it with a pure mind, give absolutely no reaction, or even maintain an attitude of profound gratitude, then all your impure states of mind and your world of suffering will begin to vanish from that very moment. So sometimes Buddhism offers us a completely different way to interpret our interpersonal relationships in life and the relationship between our own suffering and happiness. This is extremely important. Therefore, when we encounter suffering, when we run into difficult situations, we shouldn't just constantly complain, asking, "Why is this happening to me?" Doing so is quite meaningless. Third, cultivating patience by reflecting on the immense destructive power of anger. Reflecting on this anger, its power is actually devastatingly strong. So we cultivate patience from this perspective. If one harbors anger toward the Buddha's heirs, the merit of generosity and ethical discipline accumulated over 100 eons is destroyed in a single instant. Therefore, there is no fault greater than impatience. This part explains that if we give rise to anger, its power is massive and also quite terrifying. That is why we must practice patience. Otherwise, after we have worked so hard, going through great lengths to accumulate so much positive karma, a single moment of anger completely hollows out everything we've built. It's like working incredibly hard to amass a great fortune of gold, silver, and jewels, but if a fire breaks out, in an instant it all turns to ashes. It is exactly that tragic. So this verse is quite famous, and we often analyze the principles taught within it. Everyone should regularly contemplate this. There are also some varying viewpoints from different senior monks and great masters of the past on this matter. But I feel that right now, if I explain it in too much detail, many people might think that perhaps their viewpoints have fundamental contradictions. They might get that impression. So I will just touch upon it briefly without needing to go into extreme detail, because regarding this point there are indeed some differing opinions. The general meaning here is this: if someone directs anger at a bodhisattva, a child of the Buddhas, if they give rise to anger toward a bodhisattva, when that anger arises, the offense is incredibly severe. How severe is it? The practices of generosity we have cultivated over 100 eons, as we discussed earlier in the first chapter, both generosity and ethical discipline, these two parameters, along with various other kinds of merit, are completely and utterly destroyed in a single instant, leaving nothing behind. Therefore, we must practice patience. There is no other That is to say, there is no other negative action that surpasses impatience. The meaning is that we should practice patience, or rather, we must not have anger. If someone has anger, then in this world no one can stop the destruction it causes. In this world it is the most terrifying thing. Failing to practice patience is the most terrifying thing. That is the meaning. So within this verse, the simple explanation is just as I mentioned earlier: we must not direct anger toward a bodhisattva. If we do give rise to anger, it can destroy the roots of virtue accumulated over 100 eons. The main scriptural basis for this, for entering the middle way, comes primarily from the miraculous play of Manjushri. In the miraculous play of Manjushri, the Buddha told Bodhisattva Manjushri that so-called hatred can destroy the roots of virtue accumulated over 100 eons. That is why it is called hatred. When he spoke about hatred, he taught this very principle. We also have another slightly different teaching which I have mentioned before. For example, in the Way of the Bodhisattva there is a similar statement, but the Way of the Bodhisattva states that if a single instant of anger arises, the roots of virtue from making offerings to Buddhas, practicing generosity and so on over 1,000 eons are all completely destroyed. If that is the case, the text here says 100 eons, while the Way of the Bodhisattva says 1,000 eons. Which one is it? The basis for the 1,000 eons mentioned in the Way of the Bodhisattva is primarily the Sutra of the Great Heap of Jewels. The Sutra of the Great Heap of Jewels also states that if one directs anger toward a bodhisattva, all the roots of virtue accumulated over 1,000 eons, such as making offerings to the Buddha and practicing generosity, will be completely destroyed. So the sources from the two sutras are different. Because of this, the two treatises state different things. One treatise says 1,000 eons of roots of virtue are destroyed, while one sutra says 100 eons of roots of virtue are destroyed. Why is this the case? The great masters of the past have explained this. Here we need to analyze both the person generating the anger and the object of that anger. We need to look at both aspects. In this context, the person getting angry is likely not a bodhisattva who has attained the bhumas. We can put it quite plainly, because even though the auto-commentary refers to the one getting angry as an extraordinary great bodhisattva, this great bodhisattva is probably on the path of accumulation or the path of preparation. Otherwise, for a bodhisattva on the first bhumi or above, even if they were to get angry at someone, it would be impossible for their roots of virtue to be destroyed. Because once someone reaches the peak state of the path of preparation and beyond, their roots of virtue generally cannot be destroyed, nor will they fall back. Therefore, the person generating anger here must be a bodhisattva, as the auto-commentary explicitly states. And who is the object of this anger? It is also a bodhisattva, and it refers to generating anger toward another bodhisattva. So this is speaking of one bodhisattva getting angry at another. Both points can be understood this way. Because if an ordinary person were to get angry at a bodhisattva, their fault would be immeasurable and boundless. Most scholars hold this view as well. If that is the case, then if a great bodhisattva gets angry at a lesser bodhisattva, it destroys 100 eons of roots of virtue. This aligns with what is taught in Entering the Middle Way. If a lesser bodhisattva gets angry at a greater one, it's 1,000 eons. For example, if a bodhisattva on the greater path of accumulation gets angry at one on the lesser path of accumulation, it's 100 eons. But if a bodhisattva on the lesser path of accumulation gets angry at one on the greater path of accumulation, it destroys 1,000 eons. And if an ordinary person gets angry at a bodhisattva, the fully ripened retribution is simply incalculable. We can explain it that way. So to put it simply, we can understand it like this. Some wise masters also say that if an ordinary person directs anger at a noble being, the retribution is immeasurable and boundless, which is why it doesn't even need to be explicitly stated here. There is this perspective as well. Regardless, we can say that primarily those who have attained the bhumis and above are incapable of generating such anger. It simply won't happen. And even if it did, it could never destroy their accumulated merits. On the other hand, the text isn't referring to ordinary beings either, because the auto-commentary states that the one generating the anger is a bodhisattva. So looking at it this way makes the most sense. Next, regarding which roots of virtue are actually destroyed, there are also different explanations. I seem to recall that when we were studying the Way of the Bodhisattva, we analyzed this as well. What kind of roots of virtue are destroyed by anger? Its manifested aspect and functional efficacy can be destroyed, but its seed aspect generally cannot be destroyed by discursive thoughts. Anger cannot destroy the karmic seeds of virtue stored in the alaya consciousness. When we speak of roots of virtue here, which specific ones are we referring to? Generally speaking, virtues leading to liberation will not be destroyed. Virtues leading to liberation are those embraced by the wisdom of emptiness, the selflessness of persons or phenomena. These roots of virtue cannot be destroyed. Then what about roots of virtue embraced by bodhicitta and dedication? Will they be destroyed? There are differing views on this. Many great masters such as Tsongkhapa and Gorampa believe that perhaps only the virtues leading to liberation, those embraced by the wisdom of selflessness, are safe from destruction. Meanwhile, roots of virtue that have been dedicated may still be destroyed. But if dedicated roots of virtue can be destroyed, doesn't the sutra say that our dedication is like a drop of water merging into the ocean? Until the ocean dries up, the drop does not dry up. Similarly, this root of virtue will not be destroyed until we attain the fruit of Buddhahood. Why is this the case? From the perspective of the karmic seeds, this is true. However, their active functioning capacity can still be destroyed. It should be explained this way. So what about a bodhisattva's roots of virtue embraced by bodhicitta? Will they be destroyed? Because the first chapter of the Way of the Bodhisattva says that roots of virtue embraced by bodhicitta are like a wish-fulfilling tree, whereas other roots of virtue are like a plantain tree that bears fruit once and is exhausted. But this isn't absolute. Roots of virtue embraced by conventional bodhicitta might still be destroyed, but those embraced by ultimate bodhicitta will never be destroyed. Strictly speaking, this viewpoint is probably the most logical. Perhaps this differs slightly from what I taught before when going through the Way of the Bodhisattva, because this time I am explaining it from a stricter perspective. Actually, regarding this, masters like Karma Chagme Rinpoche and Khenpo Shenga also believe that virtues embraced by dedication or bodhicitta will not be destroyed. That perspective exists as well, but generally Gorampa and many other great masters likely held that even these kinds of roots of virtue can be destroyed. We can understand it that way. Furthermore, masters like Jechong Kapa and others from the Gelug tradition maintain that in the Way of the Bodhisattva, the person getting angry is not a bodhisattva, but the object of their anger is. That is their view. On the other hand, Gorampa and Mipram Rinpoche maintain that both the person getting angry and the object of their anger must be bodhisattvas. Of course, this bodhisattva, the one generating the anger, refers to the kind of bodhisattva described in the Way of the Bodhisattva, someone just as described there, who has generated bodhicitta but hasn't reached the first bhumi. They might not have even reached the state of acceptance on the path of preparation. We can say that this is the kind of bodhisattva meant here. Bodhisattvas on the first bhumi and above are incapable of generating such intense anger, and their roots of virtue cannot be destroyed. So the one generating the anger could be an ordinary person getting angry at a bodhisattva. We see this analysis in some treatises. So if a bodhisattva gets angry at another bodhisattva, it might result in the destruction of 100 or 1,000 eons of merit. But what if the person isn't a bodhisattva? What if it's us ordinary people? For example, if we get angry at our Vajra friends, what happens then? The text doesn't analyze this in great detail here. But regardless, according to scriptural evidence regarding anger, even towards something as trivial as a burning ember, we must not give rise to anger, let alone towards sentient beings. The karmic consequences are immense, and often we simply can't tell whether the person we are getting angry at is a bodhisattva or not. It's very hard to say. Among our Dharma friends or among our teachers, who might have the realization of a first bhumi bodhisattva, or even those on the path of preparation and above are also considered bodhisattvas. Therefore, generally speaking, it is absolutely crucial that we do not give rise to anger. Of course, some treatises also raise a point saying that if anger arises for even a single instant and destroys 100 or 1,000 eons of roots of virtue, then we ordinary beings could never possibly attain Buddhahood. Why is this? It is impossible for ordinary beings to never get angry. And once anger arises, the roots of virtue we worked so hard to accumulate over 100 eons, or even just 100 years, are completely destroyed by a single instant of anger. If that were the case, it would be hopeless. I would probably never attain liberation. Some do explain it this way, but in reality it isn't quite like that. We should embrace our actions with the realization of selflessness, or at least embrace them with dedication. Chagme Rinpoche has stated that as long as we embrace our virtue with pure dedication, these roots of virtue will not be destroyed. This is much like the meditative concentration of the form realm. Although it is the mind of an ordinary being, the discursive thoughts of those of us in the desire realm cannot possibly destroy the meditative concentration of the form realm. Because the lower realms cannot harm the higher realms, our lower faculties or our lower discursive thoughts cannot harm the states of the higher realms. Therefore, some great masters say that as long as we embrace our actions with the emptiness of the three spheres, with bodhicitta, and with dedication, the consequences of anger won't be this severe. Furthermore, the main point here is to emphasize that the faults of anger are extremely severe. But if we constantly purify our faults and actively restrain our anger, it is not as if ordinary beings have no chance of attaining Buddhahood. Because while the faults of negative karma are indeed severe, the merit of practicing virtue is equally inconceivable. For example, look at the merit of seeing a Buddha statue, reciting the Buddha's name, prostrating or rejoicing in the merit of others. Think of the merit of meditating on emptiness or cultivating bodhicitta. So in our human world, there are certainly many dangerous and terrifying downfalls, but there are also many incredibly meritorious virtues. Sometimes when we talk about the merits of virtue, it feels like we have so much hope, but the moment we talk about the faults of negative karma, wow, it feels like all hope is lost. We all probably feel this way sometimes. It is just like worldly matters. Worldly investments are exactly like this. If an investment fails, you really can lose everything, which is terrifying. That is looking at the worst case scenario. But when we talk about the benefits and profits, wow, it sounds amazing. Just like the stock market today, or similar worldly pursuits. If you make money, you make it easily, but if you lose it just as easily. Good and evil karma are much the same. Haven't I often told this story before? An old woman was chatting with a monk. During their conversation, the monk first told her all about the faults of negative karma. Farming creates negative karma, he said. Even eating a bowl of tsampa carries heavy faults because so many insects are killed in the process. Then a moment later, he talked about the merits of rejoicing and making offerings to the Buddha. Eventually, the old woman got quite confused. She said, I really don't know which is greater, the merit of good deeds or the fault of negative ones. When you talk about the merit of virtue, it sounds like not only do you, a monk, have hope, but even an old woman like me has hope. After all, I often make offerings and do good deeds. But when you talk about the faults of negative karma, forget about me as a layperson. Even you, a monk, are in a dangerous spot, because every day you eat bowl after bowl of tampa. You just said eating a bowl of tampa is like eating a bowl of bugs. If that is true, you are in real danger too. That is how the story goes. Indeed, both the merit of virtue and the faults of non-virtue are unimaginable. But our main focus here is anger. Regarding this topic, quite a lot has already been said, so I won't say much more about it today. Moving on, the next section discusses cultivating patience by reflecting on the numerous faults that arise from anger. That is the main topic here. It makes one ugly, leads to unwholesome actions, and robs one of the ability to discern right from wrong. Impatience swiftly casts one into the lower realms. The following text explains that anger brings about many faults, so we must not give rise to it anymore, otherwise the consequences are severe. What kind of retribution? If true anger arises within our mind stream, there are faults in several areas. First, it makes one ugly. When someone gets angry, their entire face becomes incredibly ugly. Normally, someone might be very handsome or beautiful, looking perfectly fine, but the moment they give in to anger, shouting, crying, and losing control, they can look almost like a demon. You might even think, wow, I never realized they could look like this. Their face becomes contorted and terrifying to look at. We see this all the time in our daily lives. As for future lives, if someone frequently gets angry in this life, in their next life, they will certainly be born with an unattractive appearance. Why do we see some people in this world who are particularly ugly or foul-looking? The reason is that in their past lives they frequently harmed others and gave in to anger. Second, leads to unwholesome actions. If you give rise to anger, you will constantly attract negativity, bringing all sorts of unwholesome situations upon yourself. For example, you might be attacked by others, face their insults, suffer their aggression, and so on. It brings about all kinds of negative harm. Next, robs one of the ability to discern right from wrong. What is robbed? Well, generally speaking, a person has the ability to discern what is reasonable and what is not. They have this basic wisdom, but once anger takes over, all this rationality, objectivity, and wisdom completely disappear. Everything becomes a blur. Many of us are usually quite intelligent and capable, but the moment anger arises in our mind stream, all reason and wisdom simply vanish. Sometimes when we visit prisons, we see people there who are actually very smart, but because of a single moment of rage, acting out of sudden anger, it was truly just a split second of delusion. In that single misguided moment, they committed a terrible crime and ultimately destroyed everything. So in our daily lives, when anger is truly overpowering, all rationality is lost. We even see this in movies, people smashing pots, bowls, and pans in their own homes, smashing whatever they see, even their computers. When some people get angry, they take their iPhones and smash them on the ground. In truth, this kind of anger is complete madness. Many of these people are usually quite rational and civilized, but afterward they feel profound regret for the rest of their lives because they gave in to anger and acted out in a single moment of rage. They deeply regret those actions. They regret it for a lifetime. We can clearly see this in daily life. So regarding these things as we live in this world, we can all observe this reality. For some people, their entire, as the saying goes, appearance arises from the mind. If you look at someone with a heavy temper, their whole face looks contorted and frightening. They look incredibly fierce, and their energy is very negative. But if someone is not like this and is instead very compassionate, then their entire presence is completely different. That is why the sutras from the past also say, those who lack patience are despised by all, and their afflictions grow. I believe this is from the Sutra of Repaying Kindness. It says that those who cannot endure, who lack patience, are deeply disliked by everyone. Moreover, within their own mind stream, all kinds of afflictions and sufferings constantly arise. Therefore, when it comes to what we call interpersonal relationships today, I think the most important thing is controlling our emotions and controlling our anger. Some people go their whole lives without ever leaving a bad impression on others. People think this person has a great temper, they are very emotionally stable and very reasonable. This is because they have control over their emotions. But there are some who usually can analyze right and wrong very clearly and speak very reasonably. They might normally look very dignified and have a pleasant appearance, but the moment they are driven by anger, all the ugliness inside them spills out completely. When that happens, they leave a lasting, unchangeable negative impression in the minds of others. Therefore, this anger truly causes immense harm, both to ourselves and to others. In the future, if we are not careful, the karmic retribution in our next life will be even more terrifying. Impatience swiftly casts one into the lower realms. If we cannot endure and fail to practice patience, it will cause us to very quickly fall into the lower realms of hell's hungry ghosts and animals. And the text emphasizes swiftly, very quickly. Indeed, those with severe anger who commit all sorts of evil deeds will likely fall into the lower realms very rapidly. Look at the world today, at those old men starting wars. Truly, I often wonder if they might fall into the lower realms very quickly. Having killed so many and created so much negative karma, they are actually incredibly pitiful. They are even more pitiful than those being killed on the battlefield. The people on the battlefield who die driven by anger will face their own karmic retribution. But those who give the orders and orchestrate it all, the consequences for them are even more terrifying. Therefore, practicing patience might make us seem a bit weak or powerless, but in reality it is the best protection for ourselves, and it provides the greatest sense of security for others. If we have a good temper and practice patience well, whether in our workplace, in our families, or among our Dharma friends, everyone will speak highly of us. But if you have a bad temper, even if people don't say it to your face, they definitely know it in their hearts, so we must be very careful about this. If you have indeed lost your temper like this in the past, make sure to sincerely confess and purify it. Try your best not to let these negative emotions arise again in the future. This is very important. Next, we will discuss cultivating patience by reflecting on its merits.
Zupi shazan tangar yondan namshi to zupi mzijang kiwo tambal pangdang ligdang ligman shipa lam kibran yerjang ti gukton lami kiedang digba zapran yer.
Patience brings merits opposite to those faults. Patience results in a beautiful appearance and the affection of the holy ones. One becomes skilled in discerning right from wrong, is reborn among humans and gods after death, and exhausts all accumulated negative karma. This is quite simple. If we practice patience, it brings the exact opposite of the faults we just discussed. They are completely opposite. What are these opposite merits? First of all, while anger makes one look ugly, practicing patience brings a beautiful appearance. How so? A person who practices patience has an incredibly peaceful demeanor. Their aura, their state of being, their mindset and their posture, they all radiate kindness and profound compassion. So overall, even if someone isn't naturally very good looking, if they have a kind heart and never gets into conflicts with others, they are in fact truly beautiful. This is the highest kind of beauty. They possess a natural inner beauty. Sometimes how we act in front of our parents and others is just a superficial display. But in reality, if someone among us rarely loses their temper, that is true beauty. Furthermore, such a person is loved by the holy ones. Many spiritual friends and kind-hearted people will be fond of them. In the past, Lord Atisha said, "On one hand, I have a pleasant appearance, and on top of that, I have a very good personality. So many of my teachers were incredibly fond of me." This is also mentioned in some of Lord Atisha's biographies. Yet Lord Atisha himself kept an attendant with a very bad temper by his side. It was a bit pitiful. That attendant was constantly directing anger toward a noble being, which is sad. But as for Lord Atisha, many spiritual guides loved him, partly because he was handsome, but more importantly because his heart was so kind. He didn't argue with others, and he didn't give in to anger, skilled in discerning right from wrong. When it comes to what is reasonable and what is not, they can skillfully analyze and understand it. Because their mind is usually very peaceful, calm, and grounded, they have great wisdom when it comes to handling situations and distinguishing right from wrong. They are very steady. When they encounter difficulties, they don't instantly lose their minds. They are not like that. Instead, they handle things calmly. Such a person can analyze right and wrong, the reasonable and unreasonable, with absolute clarity. They aren't like what we described earlier, panicking over the slightest issue, complaining about everything and flying into a rage. They are not like that. If someone is stable and composed and doesn't easily lose their temper, their judgment both in worldly and spiritual matters is sound. They handle everything beautifully. When such a person eventually passes away, they are reborn among humans and gods. They might be born into a noble family with a dignified appearance. Such things happen in both human and celestial realms. Moreover, practicing virtue in this way brings another incredible merit. All the negative karma we have created in the past will be completely purified. We must do our best to practice patience in this life. Practicing patience is truly so important. I think after we went through the way of the Bodhisattva in the past, many people basically didn't get angry for quite a while. But ordinary beings tend to forget, yet after some time they gradually recover. In 2014, when we were in New Zealand, I gave them 5 or 6 classes on the chapter on patience. They told me that for a long time afterward, none of the Dharma friends in New Zealand got angry at all. I don't know how they are doing now. These accounts were probably even written down. So sometimes when we reflect on it, continuing to study is incredibly important. As humans, we must keep learning constantly. We have to keep at it, just like recharging a battery. If you don't recharge, you eventually become useless, like a computer that has completely frozen. You just get completely stuck. So in this world, even though studying can sometimes be a bit tiring, if you have a few Vajra friends, like-minded people gathering together, that atmosphere and energy for learning will naturally emerge. If you are all alone, you will slowly sink into the ocean of worldly suffering. Without that self-awareness and inner drive, it is very difficult. But regardless, we must earnestly practice patience. This is crucial. Finally, let's make a conclusion. We will wrap up with this general conclusion.
Sosu kiwa tangnar yetre ki chodang zopi kyunyon rikshye de mavzor pani pabi kiwa yifngakbi zo partagdam nirwar ten.
Knowing the faults of anger and the merits of patience for ordinary beings and the Buddha's heirs, one should permanently abandon impatience and constantly cultivate the patience praised by the noble ones. Because we previously discussed the faults of generating anger and also the merits of practicing patience, based on these principles, we will now make a conclusion. What kind of conclusion? Through all the preceding analysis, we should understand that all ordinary beings in this world, as well as all noble ones and children of the Buddhas, including Sravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas, all these heirs of the Buddhas should know this. Know the faults of anger and the merits of patience. We should understand that whether it is among the children of the Buddhas or the Bodhisattvas, getting angry at one another is also terrifying. Destroying 100 or 1,000 eons of merit. An eon is an unimaginably long time. In the Treasury of Precious Qualities and the Wish-Fulfilling Treasury, I have recently been translating the Treasury of Precious Qualities, the description of a great eon, and it is the same in the Wish-Fulfilling Treasury, shows that the duration of a single eon is truly inconceivable. Perhaps it feels a bit surreal, but regardless, having the roots of virtue accumulated over such a vast period completely destroyed would be extremely unfortunate. So we must understand that whether one is an ordinary worldly being or a noble one, no matter who it is, giving rise to anger always carries severe faults, and practicing patience always brings merit. Some people might say, oh, it's fine if the guru gets angry, but the text here says noble ones and ordinary beings are the same. If inherently existent anger arises, the guru will also fall, and so will the bodhisattva. It is the same for ordinary beings who give rise to anger. On the other hand, when practicing patience, a noble one gains merit, and an ordinary being gains merit too. So first we must conceptually recognize that in this world, regardless of your caste, status, or level of realization, you might think a bodhisattva gets a free pass, and that since you're a bodhisattva, a little anger doesn't matter, but it doesn't work that way. So before the law of karma, everyone is equal. People say everyone is equal before the law, but I feel that isn't necessarily true. In some countries, the law is quite unequal and unfair, but before the law of karma, there is absolute equality. Therefore, whether you are a noble one or an ordinary being, as long as you give rise to anger, unless you are merely manifesting it skillfully for the sake of sentient beings, which requires a special level of realization we won't discuss here. Otherwise, generally speaking, it is terrifying. Whether a noble one or an ordinary being, practicing patience brings merit, and generating anger brings faults. Therefore, in terms of our actions, what should we all know to do? Permanently abandon impatience and constantly cultivate it. We must permanently abandon impatience. Impatience means anger. We must permanently eradicate this anger and constantly cultivate what? Cultivate patience. In your actual daily lives, see if you can make a little bit of a change. For your own sake, this is extremely important. If one can abandon anger, they will attain peace and joy. I believe this is stated in the Vinaya in 4 parts. If one can truly leave anger behind, they will immediately attain peace and joy. Indeed, looking at many people, the happiest ones are those without anger. I feel that an angry person is uncomfortable wherever they go. Even if they go on a vacation or stay together in a hotel, driven by anger, they can't stand this and they can't stand that. At meals, they argue with the waiter. At the hotel, they argue with the receptionist. In the car, they argue with the driver. When they return, they argue with their colleagues. They originally went on a pilgrimage to a holy mountain, but ended up coming back with a massive pile of negative karma from anger. Conversely, someone free from anger with a good heart, no matter where they go, their world is truly peaceful. Therefore, we must permanently abandon impatience and practice what? The patience praised by the noble ones, praised by all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Look at the great masters of the past, the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. They all continually praise patience. As the Sutra of the Buddha's last teaching states, the merit of patience cannot be matched by ascetic practices like ethical discipline. There are many such praises. Patience has greater merit than generosity. It has greater merit than ethical discipline. It gives rise to so many incredible merits. Therefore, since it is praised by all the noble ones, praised by the Buddha, and praised by words of truth, why shouldn't we practice this patience? Of course, when we do practice it, as mentioned in the way of the Bodhisattva, practicing patience is the most difficult thing. It remains a very challenging ascetic practice. But regardless, we now have this opportunity, especially as we are studying entering the middle way. Everyone should reflect on this again. Before we delve into the true emptiness of the 6th Bhumi Bodhisattva, the text here on the conventional level teaches us to practice patience by relying on its merits and to restrain our anger by relying on its faults. For every single one of us, this is truly so important, especially in this current era, an era heavily burdened by anger. As we all know, the whole world is in a state of turmoil. People's states of mind are disturbed. Especially this year, the fire horse year, with its intense heat. So a while ago during the new year, many places avoided using the color red and switched to yellow instead. But if our inner minds do not change, simply changing the external world and the lanterns to yellow will likely be of no use. What matters most is that if each person can slowly but surely take this inner fire of anger and begin to tame it using the nectar of the Dharma, if we can truly tame our own minds, the world will become incredibly pure. If the mind is untamed, even if a person is wealthy, has a dignified appearance, or holds a prominent and famous position, even if they possess every bit of worldly wealth and glory, what does it actually bring them? Unbearable suffering. Every day is a torment. We often see this. Some upper class people have all their material needs fully met without a single thing to worry about. Their wealth might even be enough not just for this lifetime, but for their next life and the life after that. It is completely sufficient. Yet this kind of inner peace and joy is virtually non-existent for them. It is severely lacking. So here and now, even without talking about extremely profound teachings like Dzogchen or the great Madhyamaka, if we can just manage to calm the anger within our own mind streams a little bit, then no matter what we are doing, we can view things in a positive light. Otherwise, as we practice patience, we might end up like this. I once heard a story about two Japanese monks who had been practicing patience for a long time. They had both practiced for many years. At first, they would share their spiritual experiences with each other, but later a disagreement arose between their views. In Japanese, the word for patience can be written with 2 characters or with 3 characters. One of them insisted on the longer version, while the other insisted on the shorter one. Because of this difference in opinion, they started arguing. They had been practicing patience so well, but over such a tiny issue a dispute arose. That isn't right either. We ordinary beings truly do sometimes create a lot of negative karma, unintentionally. So as we study entering the middle way now, can everyone try to reduce their attachments just a little bit? And can we calm our anger down just a little bit? Constantly observe yourselves. Or if you can manage, for instance, to go a month without getting angry, or even if anger arises inside, you don't blow up in front of others, that for you is already a massive improvement. All right, we will stop here for today.
Bandara Badma Sodargye Bandara Badma Sodargye Bandara Badma Sodargye